Greetings, leaders. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Leadership is Podcast. I am your host, Jason Muhammad, founder of JM Leadership Consulting. Today's discussion is the LGBTQ and leadership with special guest Tina Madison White, Executive Director, Blue Ridge Pride Center. In today's world of social inequality, how does this affect leadership opportunities for those of various pronouns? Let's talk about that today. Thank you. Hi, Tina. How are you?
I'm fine. Is this a good connection?
It really is a good connection. And thank you. We are recording right now. So we're actually on the podcast, if that works for you.
Great.
All right. Very good. So as I've already recorded part of this podcast with the introduction, but I'm going to go through the introduction here once again. So to my audience there, Tina Madison White is the director of the Blue Ridge Pride Center and is going to, discuss a lot on this podcast. Okay, so when I say it's going to be long, but a lot on this podcast as it relates to the LGBTQ, my lips this morning, pardon me, LGBTQ community and how it relates to leadership. And we're going to ask a few questions to Tina, especially dealing with the election and other things. And so, Tina, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, tell us a little about yourself, if you don't mind, your history and whatnot.
Yeah, Jason. Well, I'm a grandmother of five. I have five children. My wife and I have lived in Asheville for 5 years. I was a management consultant for about 35 years, working on transforming organizations all over the world. And when I was about 50, I decided to embark on my biggest transformation project yet, which was me. And I finally came out as the person I'd been hiding since I was a little child, a transgender woman. I did that on the job in New York with a big corporation and stayed there for several years, but then decided I wanted to pay it forward because my transition is the story of what happens when society actually supports you and who you are. I wanted to pay it forward, and so I moved to the South because I felt we needed more transgender voices here. And I've been busier, I think, than I ever was.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Okay, very good, very good. So now you say business consulting in New York?
Well, I was for about half of my career, I was a management consultant externally with Booz Allen, Accenture, and other companies. And then I went and worked for Pfizer for about 15 years, effectively as an internal management consulting, leading lots of large-scale change projects for Pfizer, chiefly in the U.S.
Wow.
Yeah, it was... And they were typically large-scale reorganizations or entering new markets, changing the culture of steel companies, introducing new systems and processes for insurance companies, banks, chemical companies, lots and lots of industries.
Very good, Tina. We definitely got more talking to do outside of here as it relates to leadership development and consulting and business and whatnot. And so thank you very much for that information. So that's awesome to know. That is really awesome to know. And, of course, members of our audience here can definitely take advantage of your wisdom. So we want you to make sure that at the end or before the end, you give out your contact information and how people can follow you also on social media. And also to let the audience know that Tina is going to be one of the guest panelists on a program that we're actually doing together on November the 17th. And we'll have more information about that as well here. So So tell me something, Tina. For those of us who may be ignorant to the information, what are some of the, or what are the different pronouns, and what do they mean?
Oh, goodness. At last count, I think I heard that Facebook had 54 pronouns. The basic ones are he, she, and then some people who identify as queer prefer they, or more rarely ze.
Uh-huh.
What I think is important isn't memorizing all the pronouns. For me to respect someone who is Muslim, for example, there's many varieties, many different belief systems within Islam. And
Right.
I don't need to be an expert in those. I think I can still show respect and try to learn. Or when I moved to the South, an interesting thing for me, I live in a mixed community, and many of my neighbors are Black, and they're Black and over 50. And one of the things that was new for me was, if in the South, if you're Black and over 50, you generally refer to people by their last name, even if you're dear friends in meetings. And I thought about that, and that's not unlike pronouns. It's just you're learning how to show respect to someone, and different cultures, just as different identities,
Absolutely.
have ways of just respecting one another. And if you value people, you learn to devote a little energy to keeping track of what's important to them.
Right. Absolutely. Excellent perspective, Tina. Thank you. Thank you
Sure.
for that. Because there are many, Christians from the Baptist and Methodist and whatnot. And so, yeah, it's basically respecting. Yeah, it's absolutely comes down to that respect. So thank you. So tell me something. How acceptable are, the well, before I even ask that question, so tell me something. What is the difference between queer and, I guess, homosexual? Like, what is the difference there?
Well, so that, again, if you're over 50, you tend to associate queer as meaning homosexual.
Okay.
And so actually within the LGBTQ community, there's an ongoing discussion about that, because people over 50, they learned that was an offensive term, a very offensive term. But
Yeah.
if you're under 30, queer means basically non-binary.
Yeah.
And that you don't accept any form of binary, whether it's about gender or race. There are a lot of increasing number of mixed race people who they don't want to check any of the boxes, because they say, well, I'm several of these, and that, this is someone
Sure.
else's codification, not mine. And that's kind of what being queer is about. Is it's not just about sex or gender. It's just saying, I've got an identity that I don't want to have boxed in. Don't
Yeah,
try.
that's interesting. That is very, and this is a very educational moment here that you're sharing, because growing up, many of us used words, right, that identified with people in a certain categoristic, right, like whether they're Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, or Caucasian or white. And then, whatever their religious affiliation is, whatever their sexual orientation is, and would use an actual word that meant something completely different and turn it around into a derogatory statement, to describe people. So that's interesting how you bring out, queer, how it used to be used. And I bear witness to that, how it used to be used. But now, when I look at the shows that use the word queer and whatnot, it's like, well, are they downgrading themselves or belittling themselves when they use this term? So, yeah. So thank you for education. Thank you for educating us on that.
You're welcome.
So how acceptable are these pronouns in the workforce?
They're I think they're becoming far more accepted. My experience when I transitioned, um, either you're in a company where the prevailing atmosphere is one of acceptance, and you'll have some people who struggle, but they know that the prevailing atmosphere is our company accepts people that are different, so I'd better learn to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And in environments like that, the greatest source of stress is people are so worried that they're going to screw up, and they're trying to hold a conversation with you about a business issue, and they're just worried. Now they're having to devote attention to you. What if I say he to Tina? If I feel that the intent is good, the first thing I try to do is put them at ease, because they're not. That's just our brain signaling to us, which is very different from someone who is blatantly trying to rob you of your identity, or to reject your identity.
Yeah.
But a lot of companies now include pronouns on business cards, and it's. I think it's a good thing. I think it's just getting people to think about more about what someone's identity. I wish we did. I wish we actually took it further beyond just pronouns. The fact is, there are all sorts of ways that people are rejected at work, and that's a very expensive thing for organizations. If you have people coming to work every day and they're not bringing their entire self, they're sitting on their hands in meetings because they're afraid to speak up because they feel like they're a minority,
Yeah.
Or that they're stigmatized in some way. That's costing your company a lot. And when I transitioned, that was my biggest difficulty. Wasn't my company. They were actually pretty good. I found that when I transitioned, I became more tentative. And so here I'd been before I'd been this white male leader, and I'd walk into a room and command it without thinking about it. And suddenly I'd walk into a room and go, why didn't Jason sit next to me? And I'd never thought about that before. Or why did they call on me? Or if I raise this, are they going to say that's just because she's trans? And I think that happens to women. I think that happens to blacks and other minorities, to religious minorities. If you're sitting in a room and you're very aware of your minority status, your mind, you go into this mental overload of all this extra thinking you're layering on top of what you're really there to solve with colleagues.
Yeah.
And organizations should be thinking about how to make sure everyone feels welcome, and whether that's just through the pronoun or other forms of respect for the diversity that we bring to an organization.
Sure. Thank you very much, Tina. So, and please forgive me as it relates to the pronouns, because I don't want to reduce our community as well to a pronoun, yeah. Right? What I want to do is educate people on what the pronoun, because people are, just like you say, not wanting to be offensive. So it's another challenge for I guess straight people that are actually trying to be respectful, right? And trying to be respectful of another human being's choice. And so the challenge of, transitioning from letting go of, an identity of a person and embracing another identity of a person. And so there's a challenge with that as well. So I just want to, kind of put some clarity on that. And thank you very much for accepting, to do this podcast with me.
Yeah.
The next part to this, of course, you're really going to know, is how acceptable are the pronouns, or, as it relates to leadership, in organizations, in the workforce, in the labor force. How does that affect leadership?
I'm not sure I understand, but let me venture an answer. A leader, one of the most important roles of a leader is that they establish norms of behavior. Everyone looks up to the leader and says, wow, they got to the top. They must represent the behaviors that get rewarded, that are encouraged in this organization. And we're seeing that in politics right now, where it's not just what laws get passed or what judges get appointed. It's also what norms are encouraged in our society.
Yeah.
And leaders, and in my company, it was a great example where they used the opportunity of my coming out to say, our company welcomes anyone who contributes to the company. If they are delivering value to the company, they are welcome here, period, end of story. If you have an issue with that, your issue is not with Tina, it's with it's with this company and your job.
Very bold, strong statement.
It was incredibly strong, and it electrified the company. All the colleagues were kind of cynical about the company because they've been through several downsizings. And when the company supported me, I realized that the real thing going on wasn't about me. Colleagues were excited that, wow, this company is standing up for someone. And it just made everyone come to work with just a little bit more of a swagger, with a little bit more of themselves, because they felt that they could be themselves.
Right.
And so it really had nothing to do with me. I was just the tip of the spear.
Yeah.
And so if you're talking about leadership in general, I think welcoming people with different pronouns or different religions, different anything,
right,
is a moment to be instructive and to really engage your organization, not just around equality, but around really getting the most out of that organization. It really can be a huge, it's a win-win when a leader really doesn't back into it and say, well, we need to comply with this, but they say, no, this is one of our values. It can be a very powerful moment for an organization. And one of the reasons that so many of the Fortune 500, who are very bottom line oriented, one of the reasons that they are overwhelmingly embracing the trans community and the LGBTQ community in general is they're realizing it doesn't cost anything. I mean, really, it doesn't.
Right.
And they've tapped into into the psyche of their organization to really energize people, and to bring them together around the organization's mission. But my company joked, by coincidence, shortly after I transitioned, they did their biannual morale survey. And in my part of the organization, morale shot way up. And they joked that they needed to have someone transition shortly before the morale survey every year.
Yeah, see? There we go. Yeah, that's funny. Hey, so listen, when you brought up as far as politics is concerned, so how do you think the current election is going to affect, the community?
Oh, it's going to have a massive effect in many respects. The most obvious is the executive branch has a lot of power to decide how to enforce all of the different federal programs. And the current administration has been working very hard to disenfranchise, particularly transgender people. But I think that's just step one. I think they'd like to roll back marriage equality. They've been working to remove healthcare excess. But beyond that, beyond their ability to govern programs and to appoint judges, as I said, the leader establishes acceptable norms of behavior. And one of the biggest worries in the community is just violence, threat of violence. And we've had a leader who's been inciting violence. And I think this country needs a leader that changes the conversation back to, to an adult one. We're just lost right now, and we need a leader, a leadership team. It's really not one leader. We keep talking about the leader, but when you look at the cabinet right now, it's a bunch of white men in their 60s. That's not very representative of our country.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. So listen, what we're going to do is we're going to take a short break, Tina. Mm-hmm. And then when we come back, we're just going to ask 2 other questions, and then we're going to conclude this podcast. And thank you so much once again for agreeing to do this. Mm-hmm. And we'll be right back. Greetings, leaders. I'm here to talk to you about Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone and or computer. Now, how convenient is that? Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast, too, with no minimum listenership. So it's everything that you need to make a podcast in one place. So do me a favor. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. I look forward to seeing the greatness within you. Okay, welcome back to the episode of Leadership Is podcast with our special guest, Tina Madison White, the executive director of the Blue Ridge Pride Center. So, Tina, thank you so much once again for joining us for this podcast. So the next question is, what has been some of the challenges and how did you overcome them?
When I transitioned, as I mentioned earlier, I was terrified. I thought I was going to lose my family, my job, my friends, and most of that didn't happen. And so really my challenges lay inside of me. I found that I wasn't bringing my full self to work. And this is important for other people to understand. What I always thought that allies were people who defended your rights and kept you safe. And those are very important things. And if I'd been working in another company, I would have needed allies that did physically protect me and protected my rights as an employee. But in my case, what I needed were allies who just made me feel welcome at work.
Yeah.
Tina, great to have you here today. How's your family? How's Mary doing? And it was just very little things like that just made me blossom. And I just come back out and open up. And so in that instance, allies weren't really focused on the company. Allies were the people who helped me bring the most out of me and changed me, not the company. And I think those are sort of the two faces of allyship. Is an ally can be an activist, but first and foremost, an ally is just a friend, is a colleague, someone who just makes you feel like gosh darn it, they're glad you're there. And that was the I think that was the most significant challenge I faced. The other that I suspect you faced, and the least interesting thing about me, I think, is my gender or gender identity. The most interesting thing is I went from being, without ever thinking about it, a very privileged white male, Ivy League educated. I checked all the boxes
Yeah.
for privilege, and never thought about it. And then suddenly I go poof, and the next day I'm terrified to walk the streets. I would walk the street and I'd have construction workers, catcalling me as I'd walk down 7th Avenue, New York, saying "dude walking," and I'd worry that if someone mugged me or if I was assaulted, would police even come to my aid? And I had never faced that level of fear before, and so I've sort of had, until you experience it, it's really impossible to imagine what it's like to face that kind of identity threat. And that identity threat could come from anything: the color of your skin, your religion, your accent.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that people of privilege have a clue what it's like to be cocooned inside fear.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it takes a lot out of you. The estimates are that if you live as a stigmatized minority of any sort, it costs you about 10 years of your life. And that's 10 literal years. It really does have that kind of impact on you. It raises your blood pressure. It reduces your health. It raises your level of stress. It has real consequences.
Yeah, I bear witness to that. Being a black man here in America, so in so many different ways within even our own, not being the darkest, not being the lightest, not being the tallest, not being the shortest, not being the skinniest, not being the heaviest. It's all kinds of differences, right? That we're faced with, not being a Christian, not being a Muslim, not being a Israelite, all of these things, man. There's just really, and I don't say man like man, but
Sure.
I use, I say, when I say, I'm talking to my wife, I say, man, please, so again, there goes that, there goes that challenge you were talking about in the beginning, what I mean? So I just use colloquialisms when I speak a lot of times. And so, cause I'm, urban. So anyway, striving to be a little better refined about myself as well. But any suggestions for, I guess, straight people on how to take the perceived awkwardness out of working with LGBTQ communities and in leadership position, and those that are actually in leadership position?
Yeah.
Any suggestions for that?
Sure. One is, don't worry about it being awkward. It's awkward. So it sort of compounds itself if you get too worried about being awkward. Also, I don't think that straight people should feel guilty of anything. We all, and myself included, trans people put people into boxes. That's how the brain works. The brain categorizes constantly. But what I tell people, I think the most important thing you can learn is that when we use labels to identify other people, but actually, when we use labels, we're actually identifying ourselves. If I meet you and the first thing I think of is, oh, he's a black man. Well, okay, number one, I haven't learned anything about you that's really interesting, because I don't know anything about your capabilities, your skills, your attitudes. I know nothing. What I've just told myself, though, that's how I've just told myself that my mind works, where the first thing it notices is the color of someone's skin. And that's something for me to work on. And so rather than get caught up in, gee, am I good or bad? I just try to use that as a learning opportunity to say, oh, here's how my mind works. This is the shortcut it keeps taking. How do I get past that? And, oh, let me go ask Jason something about himself. And in other words, don't worry about, don't focus on the way my mind has made patterns. Build new ones by asking new questions about.
Excellent.
Yeah. So I think
Yeah.
it's move beyond it. I mean, accept it. It's not going to go away. People will not magically stop thinking about race. That's it won't go away for generations.
Right.
But you can say, well, but how do I build beyond that? And I think that's what a leader can do is to establish step one is to establish an environment of acceptance and safety that everyone should feel very safe coming to work. And if that's not there, you got to start with that. But then stop focusing on that and say, well, now let's learn about each other. Otherwise, you're just continually scratching the itch. I'm happy, for example, I am not offended if people want to talk about my gender because I'm an ambassador. That's my role. But as I said, like in running this podcast and your organization, you're not going to work every day and going, I'm a man or I'm black. You're going, I am someone who cares passionately about leadership, and that's what I want to talk about.
Absolutely.
And I think all of us have we have passions in life, and we do have our identities. We have our sexual orientation. We have our race. Those are givens, and so those need to be acknowledged. But that's not what any of us wakes up every day wanting to change in the world or wanting to do. We all want to have some kind of impact.
Right.
And that's what a leader can do is get people to refocus around their shared mission and what they can bring to the table. I'm getting very excited about that.
Very good. Hey, Tina, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, learned experiences, and values and core principles with us today. I agree with you 100% that you recognize who you are, and you're willing to fight for those who recognize who they are as well, but don't have the courage to really stand for who they actually are. And so that's excellent. And it takes leadership, to actually go out there and accept the challenge to change, right? Not only externally, but internally as well. So thank you so much. I wanted to share with our public that we're hosting a Closing the Leadership Gap series. And session 1 is conversations about women in leadership. And of course, Tina Madison White, the executive director of Blue Ridge Pride Center, is going to be one of our panelists in that. You don't want to miss this. And so Tina and, with LaShawn Abram from Transit, Bill Gillian from Bill Gallan from Action Coach, Kimmy Hunter. There's going to be Cortina Janelle Caldwell from the Our Day Project, and many more are going to be on this panel, really discussing how we can close the leadership gap between men and women. And I had to have Tina in this conversation, being a transgender woman. We want to make sure that that is a leadership gap as well. And so we want to make sure that people are really educated on this, because I think in 2025, the workforce is going to be 75% millennials. And so when millennials coming into new leadership positions, right, that are taking over from the old antiquated leadership models that no longer exist, right, from a time zone that no longer exists, I think that it can actually start the process of really changing the world. And so that's the process. That is the actual, that is the end result that we actually want with these leadership gaps. It's not just to close a leadership gap. We really want to just change the world. So, Tina, how can people contact you and follow you on social media?
Well, my social media page on Facebook would be Person Inside. I'm Tina Madison White, but that's the personal. I also have a website, personinside.com. And I call it that because when I transitioned, what I learned was that none of us really sees the person inside one another. And yet that's what we all want, that we want people to embrace the person inside each of us.
Yes, very good, very good, very good. Well, listen, it has definitely been an honor and a pleasure, Tina, with this podcast with you. In this, definitely should not be the last one that we do. In fact, quite possibly in March or so, we may have you back on as we continue this Closing Leadership Gap series. So listen, hey, thank you so much for all of our guests that are listening to this podcast. Thank you so much, Tina, for being a guest. And I look forward to talking to you a little later today.
Jason, it's been a blessing. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Hey, thank you so much for enjoying another episode of Leadership Is Podcast as we talked about the LGBTQ community and leadership with our special guest, Tina Madison White of the Blue Ridge Pride Center. I hope you learned. I did. I definitely learned a lot. And so we would definitely like to have Tina on the show at another time. So listen, also remember that I work with emerging leaders, high potential employees, and students to develop and embrace a growth mindset for leadership. If you would like for us to do a presentation, keynote your next event, or for a free half-hour consultation, please contact us at jason@jmleadershipconsult.com. Visit my website, www.jmleadershipconsult.com, or call us at 828-333-7234, and we will respond promptly. Also, please subscribe to this podcast using the Anchor app or, anchor.fm. You can use Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well at Leadership Is. Please follow us on our social media, Twitter at LeadershipJM, Facebook and Instagram is JM Leadership Consulting. And always remember, leadership is influence and service.